live. I am continuing reading out of Lord of the Horizon. It is a far memory book by Joan Grant, who wrote about her previous lives. This life is as Ra-Ab. He lives in the nome of, in fact he is the nomarch of the Oryx. They all have different names. This is ancient Egypt. We are here in chapter 7 of the second part, and it is entitled Leadership. I had frequent news of how Amenemhet and Senusert were faring with the exiles' children, though neither of them knew this, and in 15 days I heard they had left the farm where they had spent the last night of their homeward journey. Beckett and I decided to go out to meet them, and she said that 2 of her pet goats wanted to come with us. She had taught them to be surprisingly obedient and accept when they felt that a patch of herbage looked too promising to be passed untasted. They followed us like well-trained dog. I do wish Mother had let me go with Amenemhet and Senusert, said Beckett. She ought to realize that girls of 8 are quite as old as boys of 10 and 12. I'm tremendously excited to hear how they got on. I'm sure I should have been much better at it than they were, because of my being able to look after animals. It's no use telling a goat not to nibble Mother's plants. You have to make it believe that grass and unimportant shrubs really taste much nicer. Some people make being good sound so awfully dull. People like Niam, I mean. You make being good a kind of adventure, which is why I'm so much more obedient with you than I'm with anyone else, even with Mother. If I ever met someone as good at adventures as you are, I'll marry him at once. Thank you, Beckett, I said gravely. I'm very honored. I'm not just saying it to be nicer. It's true. You are a very special person and so beautifully unold. Then, before I could find a suitable reply to this generosity, she cried out, "Look at that naughty goat. He's got into a garden." She ran down the road and tried to drag the goat away from a plot of lettuces. The woman who owned them came out of her house, still holding a twist of the dough she had been kneading. "My goat is very sorry," said Beckett apologetically, "but he has absent-mindedly eaten 4 of your lettuces. He says he would like me to do something for you to show he's sorry. Would you like me to help with your dough? I know how to do it, and my hands are clean, at least fairly." I had waited in the shadow of a straw stack to see what Beckett was going to do, and the woman did not know I was there. "Come into the house, and I will give you a cup of milk," she said amiably. "Then you can shape some of my bread for me." After a few minutes, Beckett came out of the door, looking back as she walked down the path and waving to the woman who smiled at her through the window. As soon as she had rejoined me, she said, "Such a very nice woman she was. 2 babies already, and she expects another before the second harvest. And she's got 2 grey cats, and her husband is very fond of melons and radishes, and he cut his leg very badly when he was making the straw stack, but now he's healed. She thinks Ra-Ab Hotep is even better nomarch than his father was. She said that if I could have stayed longer, she would have given me a loaf, because I helped with her baking. But I explained that my father was waiting for me. She said that I ought to have brought you in too, as there was always food in the house for a hungry traveller. So I told her that you couldn't, because you had to look after the rest of the goats. And she said that her father was a goatherd too, so we belonged to the same caste and were almost kinsmen, which no doubt was why I was such a nice girl. Then she said I could come to see her whenever I liked, and I said I would. We had brought some food with us and sat down to eat it under a tree. Beckett was soon absorbed in throwing crumbs to a quail, and at last it became so confident that it ate from her hand before flying away. Since she was a baby, she had had this power of making animals fearless of her, and though she had been a particularly contented baby with a smile for everyone, I have seen her attack Niam like a wild cat for deliberately treading on a beetle. She often spent hours lying on the floor watching insects, and her description of their adventures were as exciting as though she was telling me of a lion hunt. Niamh frequently complained to Mary of Becket being allowed to keep in the nursery worms, toads, a rat with a broken tail, and a varied collection of beetles. But any attempt to remove them sent Becket rushing to me to demand that I give them my protection. In spite of Mary's sighs and Niamh's bitter mutterings, I had always agreed with Becket that she had the right of extending the sanctuary of the oryx to anyone she chose. Suddenly, Becket called out, "There they are! There, just beyond the trees." I looked up to see Amenemhet and Senusert drudging along the road towards us. They both looked very cheerful, though Senusert's cheek was coloured with the olive green of an old bruise. "Tell us all about everything," demanded Becket, jumping up and down excitedly. "Senusert first, because his face looks as though he had the most adventures." "It's not worth seeing now," said Senusert, "but it was lovely when it was new, though I never saw it at its best because there wasn't a mirror until we reached the overseer's house." "Was it somebody much bigger than you, or only smaller and quicker than that hit you?" asked Becket. "About the same size and much quicker, but there were two of them. I'll tell you about it when I get to that part of the story. The 3 children I got were 2 boys and a girl, brother and sister, and the other boy was a kinsman who lived with them. I had to collect them from their parents. Even before I reached the house, I heard a frightful uproar, a man and a woman quarreling, and then the sound of a slap and a child howling. Then the woman opened the door and said rudely, 'Fancy sending a child to take my 3 on a journey. I suppose I've got to do as I'm ordered, for every time I argue they say that if I don't like it here I can go away. Wicked it is of them, I think, not giving a poor woman the right to grumble in comfort without threatening to send her away to live with a lot of black people. Mind, you take care of them and don't let them lead them into trouble, oryx or no oryx. I'll cut off your ears, even if they kill me for it." Her husband interrupted her, saying, "No ears would be a blessing with you in the house. Your tongue is more trouble than scorpions in the thatch." The children looked very clean, and each clutched a bundle tied up in a blue cloth. After they had finished saying goodbye, they followed me quite willingly to where I had left the pack donkey. For a while they drudged along beside me without speaking. Then one of them asked me which nome I come from, and when I told them that I lived here, he said, "Oh, we thought you were an honorable rebel like ourselves. That's why we've been doing what you told us." The girl was the same age as Becket, but thin and undersized. She soon got tired, so I said she could ride between the panniers on the donkey. The elder boy, who wasn't her brother, thought it was a good joke to hit the donkey so that it sheared, and the girl fell off and scratched her leg. She made such a fearful fuss that it was difficult to be reasonably sympathetic. She was too frightened to get on the donkey again, so we had to go even more slowly. The eldest boy had a blister on his heel, at least he said he had, and he demanded to be allowed to ride the donkey. I explained to him that he was too heavy, while the panniers were still full, but he insisted. I let him get up on its back because it had started to bray, and as I heard another donkey answer, I knew it would probably bolt if I let go the halter. It did too. He clung on until they were nearly out of sight, then he fell off into the ditch. The other 2 screamed with laughter when they saw him covered with mud. He trailed along behind us, muttering to himself and saying that his leg was broken. I didn't take any notice because he forgot to limp when he thought no one was watching him. There were storm clouds in the west, so I thought it might not be good for the girl to sleep out in a field. I stopped at a farm and asked if they would give us shelter for the night. I said that we had our own food with us, but the farmer insisted on our sharing their meal. After we had eaten, I asked him what we could do in return, and when he found that I knew how to groom oxen, he let me do his pair. I told the boys that they could clean out the stall, but they refused, so I said that unless they did, they would go hungry. They laughed at me, and I said I seemed to have forgotten that they had already eaten, so had no need to earn their food. I went to where I had put the panniers and took out some food, saying it was their share for the next day, and gave it to the farmer's geese. They didn't believe I intended to see they went hungry, and when the following evening I took from the pannier only sufficient for the girl and myself, they demanded to be given their share. I refused to give it them, saying that as they had refused to repay the farmer for his generosity, they could hardly expect me to be generous to them. At first they whined and said they were starving. I hoped they felt like it. Then they tried to take food by force, and we had a fight, which is how I got the bruise. But they hadn't been trained in fighting like I have, so in the end I won. That night we stopped at another farm, and this time they offered to be helpful without being asked. The elder boy was much the most difficult. He started to throw stones at some ducks and wouldn't stop even when I shouted at him. So I threw stones at him, and a girl joined me, while her brother stood jeering at the sight of his kinsman running up the road and yelling us to stop. He sulked all that day, but he didn't throw any more stones. They all seemed surprised to find that when we needed anything, I asked for it, and I was always willing. I asked for it, and it was always given willingly, and that in return I expected them to join me in doing something to show our gratitude. We saw cucumbers growing in a field, and the girl said she wished we dare risk stealing some. The elder boy agreed and said it was unfair that the owner had so many cucumbers when we had none. But when I said, "Go and ask the owner," they thought I was joking until they saw that as soon as I asked, we were each given one. They helped the man weed his field and didn't even grumble. The same kind of thing happened 3 times. Once it was some lettuces we wanted, and another time melons. Gradually they realized that it was easier to ask for a favor than to steal, and much less worrying. They found it pleasant to be liked and made welcome instead of being chased away. Their parents had never bothered to make their lives interesting, and had ordered them about until it became natural to them to rebel against any kind of authority, without even questioning whether it was true or false. They kept on asking me to tell them more about the Oryx, and they all said that it sounded a very interesting place to live in. After that they weren't any trouble, and they even stopped quarrelling among themselves. "Now let Amenemhet tell his story," said Beckett. "Mine is not really worth telling because it wasn't at all exciting. I had 3 boys, and I was told they had caused a lot of trouble in the exile village. So I went to them and said that the overseer didn't want to give them permission to go to the south of the Nome because he thought they were too stupid to make the journey. They were very indignant and said they had been promised permission to go there and that they were to be taught a craft. I looked surprised and said, "Oh, but I thought you didn't want to be taught anything." They then said that this was a monstrous injustice, that they had had as much right to be taught as anyone else, and that if they were given the chance, they would soon show that exiles were just as clever as the people of the Oryx. I promised to try to persuade the overseer to reconsider his decision, adding that I thought it very unlikely that he would. I left them for a while and then came back to say that the overseer had been inclined to grant permission, but had been unable to do so, as he had no one to send with them as a guide, so they would have to wait until someone happened to be making the journey. They looked very disappointed and asked how long I thought they would have to wait, and I said probably for a month or 2. Then I added, as though the idea had just occurred to me, "I'm starting for the south tomorrow. If you want to come with me, I can show you the road, but we shall have to go without official permission, and if you break any of the laws of the Oryx, I shall get punished for offering to guide you." They assured me fervently that they wouldn't break any laws, and they didn't, so we had a very uneventful journey. They considered it their right to be taught, and the more I told them about our customs, the more they wished to hear. They were like merchants trying to find out the secrets of another's trade. One of them is going to learn how to be a potter, and the other 2 are to be apprenticed to the builders in stone. It seems that in their own nome, these are considered the most important castes. "I'm afraid my story is very dull," said Amenemhet apologetically, but nothing at all interesting happened, not even a fight. So that was the 7th chapter. The 8th chapter is entitled Obedient Monkeys. Have a lovely Wednesday.